Wow. So everything's clicking pretty good. The YouTube link just popped on. So it must be just a matter of time before it goes live. Here we are.
Yeah, we're broadcasting. Hey, hey.
Just like faster than a Mississippi.
I'll just go to the chat and see what people are saying. Okay, so we're here, mate. We're here by ourselves, so that's great. Good to see you, man. Good to see you.
Yeah. No, here we are. Sunday turned into Wednesday.
Yeah, and bit of. I'll just turn the voice down. A bit of chaos in town with the field days.
Yeah, it's quite. It's funny. I mean, those 3 years of work with you, it was always the same. It was lots of traffic and lots of rain.
Okay, I'm going to give a shout out, Carl, to JJ's House of Jams, and he's a good friend of our channel. He's been saying some nice words about some of the clips that we've uploaded. He's a awesome guitar player, and he's a regular on a few other YouTube channels. So yeah, he knows his stuff. He had a friend pass away recently, and he posted a beautiful tribute of a musical piece. I'll send you that link later for you to check it out if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So before we get in and have a chat, I'll just show JJ. This is my 2002 Wolfgang, made in Japan.
Wow, nice piece of work.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's pretty good.
Is it Eddie Van Halen, or is that a Carlos Santana?
It's one of Eddie Van Halen's guitars.
Oh wow!
And you can see I've recently put on these eyelets, and the eyelets there.
Wow.
And what else have I done to it? Oh, set it up. The guy that had it before me, just the action was about 2 inches high. But what's really interesting about this guitar, it's because the scale is quite funny. It's quite short, and so if you play with this guitar and then you go straight, you've got to get used to the scale, I suppose. I don't know what the technical term is. I'm sure the guys in the chat will tell us.
So that's a maple neck with humbuckers.
Yeah. Cheers, Quentin. Yeah, it's a beautiful guitar. It's a and with that quilt top that's on it. Yeah, it's good. It's got Van Halen. It's a wild guitar, Carl. Yeah, those humbuckers. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah, thanks, guys. So, but we'll show some more guitars later on as the shows go on. Yeah, scale length. JJ's got it right. Yeah, the scale length on this from there to the nut, and the way that it sits in the body is shorter than from there to there.
Oh wow!
On a Strat, is that correct? I think they are in between a Les Paul and a Strat scale length. Yeah. So because I've been playing a Strat for 20 years, and then you go to that guitar, it's you got to work it out. Anyway.
Yep.
Anyway, we can talk.
Well, it's a bit like it'd be a bit like buying a heavy metal guitar that's 7 strings with 24 frets.
I can only count up to 6, so I'll never get a 7-string guitar. JJ's got a few though. He's got some nice Ibanez guitars. You know, they're beautiful guitars. You remember that Ibanez that I had that didn't have the trem, that had a beautiful flat neck?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was a beautiful.
That was your designated heavy metal bogan guitar from Melville, right?
Yeah, but yeah, it didn't have a trem. So if you're going to play any kind of Van Halen licks, you need a trem.
I imagine that's quite light. Is that correct?
Yeah, because it's made out of basswood, which is quite light.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's not bad. So anyway, JC Smith is here, JJ's House of Jams, and Quentin James. So they're here in the chat saying g'day to you, Carl.
Awesome.
So we were talking the other day about Blue and Lonesome, and we made a couple of comments about how important Little Walter was to the British blues scene, but specifically, you know, to the Beatles, to the Stones.
Yep. Well, especially the harmonica influence. I mean, blues you can only do so much with the guitar, but you add the harp, it's just a lot more. It's the icing on the cake, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you made reference also to that. And I can't remember where I read it or heard it, but Clapton wanted his guitar to sound, you know, at some stage, you know, like a harmonica. And I think, did you say Keith Richards or was it Brian Jones that wanted wanted to mimic the way that the harmonica was being played in blues with the way that they played the guitar or something?
Well, no, just I mentioned Little Walter. Basically, there's a term called, I've forgotten the term, but he wanted it to sound like a saxophone. But I can imagine with the triplets and the trill sound that with Clapton with the woman tone probably wanted to sound a bit like a harp, because let's face it, Little Walter, what changed his sound from the original amazing harp players was Sonny Boy Williamson, and all those guys would cup the harp in their hand. It was a country harp, and then play it into a microphone where I think Little Walter had a separate microphone plugged into an amp and got an overdriven sound, didn't he?
Yeah. So who was instrumental in him playing through the Green Bullet mic? Was that something that he did himself, or was it something that Muddy suggested that he go and do? Or
yeah, it's escaped me now. I probably would have read about it many years ago, but I just remember the fact that he wanted to. I think he wanted to be with a saxophone. It's obviously was an expensive instrument in the day, and then with the harp, it's so versatile. I mean, like Sonny Boy Williamson with his big coat, he could fit 10 harmonicas in his pocket. You know, I mean. And then don't even get me started about Junior Wells with the chromatic harp. You've seen that? That's a huge harp. That's an amazing sound as well. But yeah, I just think the versatility was what won them on the harp. Just a little thing you could. I mean, $25 put in your pocket, roll up to the gig, you're away. That's probably what. And to, it's probably hard to play a sax and sing with the harp. It's a lot easier to sing, you know. So I think just just how small it was probably the and how authentic the sound was to the blues, and how much they loved the sound, I guess, was probably what made them, you know, want to take up the harp. That's just what I'm thinking. Plus, it's just a beautiful sound. You know, it's very expressive. And if you think about it, in those days, especially with the jazz scene, there was a lot of saxophone players out there, so harp was relatively quite different, kind of new. What they call it, the Mississippi saxophone, or the Southern saxophone was the term for the harp. I'll next time we do the show, I'll get the right term.
yeah.
I think it's called the Mississippi saxophone was the harp. But yeah, and look, and we talked about the Stones. Keith Ralph, Yardbirds took up the harp he knew, all those British blues bands wanted to. Peter Green, our hero, he played the harp, played it well. The rites of passage was to play the harp at some point. What's his name? Robert Plant, I think, even tried, didn't he, on that, what's that Sonny Boy Williamson song he did? Something about going home.
Yeah.
Baby. Dum, 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 baby.
Well, yours truly is tried to learn the harp too, and I can play along to a couple of basic 12-bar tracks.
Yep.
But I agree with you. It's an expressive instrument,
Yep.
but it's like a lot of things. You got to if you want to be good at it, you have to play it regularly. And
it's
I don't.
I admire people. I mean, I'm like you. I tried to play the harp, and you played it pretty well. And I just kind of, but I kind of just like it was just something I tried to do for a short period of time. But those little square holes are pretty small. It's a lot of skill and blowing and breathing, eh?
Well, I always found it was the breathing. Yeah. So, but no, like you, I appreciate, the fact that, the Stones early on, wanted to provide an authentic sound to the blues that they were reinterpreting. I don't know if we spoke about this on the show or it was something that we were talking afterwards about, but I have been thinking about it, so I'm going to mention it again. The first album that the Stones came out with, England's Greatest Hitmakers, we know was a landmark album because that provided the benchmark, the foundation, the model, the blueprint for other blues bands to come to follow.
Yep.
And I wonder if Blue and Lonesome, which was released in 2016, I wonder if that album's going to have the impact that their first album had
on the younger generation, or good question. I mean, if music keeps going the way it does, down a slippery slip of no talent, I mean, the kids will be wondering or just looking for, especially, something that's real, tangible. I mean, I'm not sure what how many records that sold, but I imagine. I mean, I remember. I didn't go to the show, but it was in Austin, Texas. There's actually a free concert. I don't know why I didn't go. And the Stones did a concert. And I was talking to some people, and they said there was 3 generations of people there. There were the grandfathers that were the same age as the Stones, their sons who were hounding their dad's record collection, and the sons and the daughters of the sons. That just shows you the impact and the longevity and the quality of the Stones. 3 generations at one concert. You can't tell me some crap rappers can do that, or pop or disco can have 3 generations at one show. And the sons and the grandchildren were loving it. They did. It's a famous concert. I think it's part of that. It was in 2008, I think, and they did an outdoor show in Austin as part of that 40 Licks or something, and they did Bob Wills' song, and they did Buddy Holly's song. They did a whole bunch of really unique songs they never do, and they just had a great time. I think it might have been Keith's birthday too. But I've just got my Uncle Google out. Here we go. Mississippi sax.
Yeah.
Mississippi sax, slang, a simple harmonica. So there you go. So yeah, that explains the harp. But no, you're right. Blue Lonesome is, it came out in a time where, the Stones had done full circle, and we're in the digital media age. And I imagine lots of kids would have copped that album. They would have, they've been just what's this? Who's this? Oh, my dad loved the Stones. My granddad loved the Stones. Who knows? It could have a great impact. You just never know. I do know that their first album was a landmark, just like you said, because it touched a lot of bases. It had Route 66 was the first song, which basically gave the whole world, especially all those English kids, basically a geography of America with the actual lyrics going through San Bernardino and St. Louis and going through,
Like stuff, Arizona.
yeah, all that. Don't you want Mona?
Yeah.
Have you seen Mona? Big stuff. Yeah, yeah. But just that landmark album. Yeah, exactly. It's just like
Well,
what.
well, I'm not as optimistic as you are with the 2016 release. I don't think, it's been, what, 2 years. And unfortunately, I haven't checked where it's been in the charts.
Yep.
If it means anything these days. I don't think that means anything like it used to. But I don't think it's going to have as much effect on whatever young people are today. If it is, I think it's going to be something that history is going to determine by saying this is an album that they released 50 years after the band started. I think it's nostalgic for fans like you and I, and and let's face it, we're young Stones fans compared to, there's some Stones fans out there who got 20, 30 years on us. But I think, it's nostalgic, and we certainly appreciate it for what it is. But I don't think it's going to have anywhere near the impact of what that first album had, simply because of the music that's out there now isn't open to that type of music.
Well, the other thing too is you got to realise is when that first Stones album came out, we've talked about this before. People heard it through either a record player or through the radio. I mean, obviously they really and 45s were big in those days too. So every album had to have 2 or 3 singles attached to it. So the 45s came out usually before the album, and they were the hit songs. So that was just the way that music was set up then. So the 45s sold a lot of units. That got the buzz going, and then once the buzz started happening, then the producers and the engineers and the managers say, "You guys have got to put out an album." So the 45s were the initial money makers, and they had EPs, extended play, which if you're fortunate enough to have the money, you could buy 4 songs, 2 songs on each side. EP means extended play. And then the album came out, which was basically the pizza, the every piece to the puzzle, the every and so what I'm trying to say is when the 45 of the EP or the album came out, there was no TV, no YouTube, media, digital age. So people actually enthusiastically loved this music based on not a visual aspect, but a listening aspect. We live now in such a visual environment. I remember talking to this girl in Austin. We were talking about some show, and she goes, "Oh, I don't think she's any good." I said, "Oh, music's incredible." "Oh, she's not very attractive." That's the mindset of young people. It's all visual, theatrics, and good looking. So it's a shame. It's a travesty.
Oh, look,
talent is sidestepped for a visual appeal.
Look, I hear you, and I agree with you, and I don't want to be a generation basher, but yeah, no, I agree with you. I remember when I was young, with my friends, we would get the record and we would go to somebody's house and we would put the record on, and we would sit there and we would listen to the record, and we would normally look at the
play it from start to finish, right?
Yeah, and look at the record cover, because
and read the
and that was how you would get your information, or get the feeling or the vibe for the album. And I remember hanging out with some guys who were extremely clever, listening to their interpretation of the record covers, and their interpretation of the record cover while the music's being played was the Google. you know, you're listening to someone saying, oh, you know, that sounds like it's you know, that's got a country feel, and that's going back to Graham Parsons. Well,
Yes.
yeah, well, they weren't using those examples, but yeah, I'm sure we've got those experiences. But today, now you just come home, you flick the YouTube on or whatever, and
Spotify,
you've got that visual aspect to music, which is more important than the actual musical content. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I remember watching. I'll just put this celery in my soup. Just give me a second.
Yeah, well, you do that, and I'll just have a look at the chat. So Simon Williams is saying, music is diverse these days. It's so hard to find the stuff that might appeal to us. Well, that's right, I suppose. Yeah, you've probably got to go down those different roads and find something that you like. And JC Smith says he's got Blue and Lonesome bookmarked on Spotify. So,
yep,
yeah.
Well, we remember. I'm a big Stones fan right up to about 81, and there's a couple of things I'll mention. Tattoo You is a phenomenal album, and to this day it holds a lot of weight. But there was that famous song that came around about that time in 1981, 1980 called what's that song? Video Killed the Radio.
Video killed the radio star.
Which is a sign of the times. MTV
79 that came out.
MTV came on. Everything was visual, videos and clips, and everything turned. Music had always been disposable, but it became even more disposable. So bands got just shifted in, shifted out. You had, and then obviously the digital age came in, the disco era. And the 80s pop, and then they even changed the studio sound. A lot of people who love music will tell you that records in the 80s didn't sound very good. The drumming sound was terrible. People were just trying new things, and they forgot about that's why the Stones, when they did Blue and Lonesome, I imagine, and let's talk about Eric Clapton with Blues from the Cradle in 1996. They said, listen, we're going to go in a studio, let's get rid of a lot of this crap, let's throw away a lot of the soundboard, this engineering, and all this crap, and just get down to the raw basics. He put on an ES335 and put in a tube amp and said, "I'm going to try and I guess Eric's Blues to the Cradle was the Stones' Blue and Lonesome."
Well, what's interesting about that album that was released in '95 was that Eric had to fight his record company to do that album because, like all record companies, they want pop music. They want and up until then, even though the Unplugged album clearly was a blues album, did really well, the record company executives were wanting another Layla, another Pretending. And Eric said, well, look, are you guys idiots? We did an acoustic blues album and I won 5 Grammys for it. Clearly there's a market out there.
Yep.
For people who want some blues music. So, he fought the record company. He wanted to make it live too. Yes. So it's a live album recorded in the studio, and and it's live for all the right reasons. You can hear his vocals on some of the songs are gruff, he's too close to the mic, he's too far away from the mic. You can hear a couple of fluffs there in some of the licks, it's a great album, and
that to this day on that album on vinyl is very sought after, and it's a bona fide classic. And I remember driving around my HQ with some friends, and they were curious about our band, and they didn't know much about music, and they were like, "Oh, we really like that song "Tore Down" from Eric Clapton." So that was kind of hit from the album, wasn't it? It got a bit of radio play.
I don't remember that getting any radio play. I remember Motherless, the acoustic song, um, Motherless Children, or Motherless Child. Oh gosh, I can't remember.
Off Blues from the Cradle.
Yeah. And it was on the the music programs. The video, it's him sitting there playing a 1930s acoustic.
It's actually a really neat song. Yeah, they did a good job of that. I think that's the last song. Is it the last song on the album?
Oh, mate. From the Cradle. Motherless Child. I'll play 30 seconds of it so that we don't get into trouble with YouTube. This one.
Awesome.
If it's going to play.
Oh.
So I remember that being the radio hit.
Okay, yep. And
but you getting back to blues albums, I suppose, and the impact that it has on a generation. That first album clearly, as we both agreed, was a landmark album, and I think Blue and Lonesome is only important to Stones nuts, British blues fans or blues fans in general. I don't think it's going to have anywhere near the impact because people are just listening to other stuff.
Yeah, well, music's at your fingertips now, and people are definitely impressionable, where they want to basically either fit in with the crowd, play top 40, or I don't know. Like you say, I think the word Stones nuts, or not necessarily the word purist, but people that are bona fide fans is where it probably is where the album probably lies. I think, with everything said and done.
So do you remember the first time when you listened to Beggars Banquet?
The first album from the first show was Get Your Yayas Out, and then I thought to myself, I'll just buy Get Your Yayas Out. I'll buy the first album, and Rolled Gold was a famous double album that was around on, and that'll do me for a Stones collection. I'll cover all the bases of those three albums, but lo and behold, after 30 years, I've got 30 albums of them. But I think I got into Beggars Banquet a bit further down the road, I mean, I thrashed Get Your Yayas Out, loved it. Then got the first album, and then Beggars Banquet. Basically, I think everything, all the dots connected when you listen to that, because it's a very mature album. I think the first album everyone liked because it had a lot of energy, and then Get Your Yayas Out live album, energy. But then when you actually became a bona fide fan, you listen to that album as a studio album, you're like, wow, these guys are really good. These guys, these guys are proper musicians. I mean, my two favorite songs, I played these for months on end, was Parachute Woman and Jigsaw Puzzle Blues, which were just unknown songs on the album, but just amazing songs. If I had my guitar, I'd play Jigsaw Puzzle Blues. It's just, it's four chords that go up, and those same chords go back down. Easy to play. But yeah.
I was a little bit like you. I think I was probably about 18 or 19 when I was at a friend's place, and we were staying there for the weekend. Yep. And anyway, there was a record collection, and like you did back then, you'd go through someone's record collection.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by the records, because it had all the Beatles, all Led Zeppelin, and a heck of a load of Stones albums.
Yes.
And I, for some reason, I remember getting Beggars Banquet only because when I saw the songs, it had Street Fighting Man and Sympathy for the Devil. So those were songs that I knew. So, okay.
Cool.
So I put that on, and I think there was about 3 of us, and typically 2 other people went and did something else. And I remember listening to that album thinking, my gosh, I hadn't heard Stray Cat blues.
Wow.
I fell in love with that. Parachute Woman, Prodigal Son, and I'm thinking, I remember sitting there going, is this Mick Jagger?
Yeah.
This can't be Mick Jagger singing this, because and I became a fan, obviously, there and then, of that album. And I remember talking to some workmates at the time, and they were a little bit older than me, and I didn't understand really this idea or the concept of what a record was.
Yes.
Can't see you.
I'm just going to plug in my phone and start.
Okay. But that's exactly what you said, Carl. That's an album. Every single song on that album is outstanding.
Yep. I'm just going to plug this in. I've just got those song lists on my computer, and we'll run through it real quick if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. And I'll just do a brief analysis of every song. So Route 66 we talked about. It's a soundtrack. I remember reading up about the Stones, and they were talking about Route 66, and they had a you know how we love reading those Rolling Stones books, and just the author basically said not only was that particular song a soundtrack to those young English eyes and ears about just America, the land of milk and honey, the land of paradise, because of just everything happened in America. But that that was, can you imagine being a British kid singing that song and thinking to yourself, one day I'll go to the promised land? And sure enough, they did many tours. But moving on down, I Just Want to Make Love to You, Willie Dixon. So that was basically, if you listen to the original with Muddy Waters, that was a slow song. They gave it that British bit of a beat sound to that.
And that became their trademark, I think. Adding that extra beat. Yeah. That's certainly what got the young people listening to them, didn't it?
Yeah. Because that the original style through Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon was, and Little Walter on harp was
sorry
was a groove, a slow blues groove, and they were like, we love the groove, but we want to get people dancing.
And you just like I accidentally pressed it there because I went to scratch my leg, but you can hear probably Keith Richards doing a bend up now, so
yeah, it's in the key of G, and it's just
doing some Texas blues.
yeah, and that's that famous song where Brian switches harp twice.
Yes.
So yeah, moving on down. Honest I Do, Jimmy Reed, hard song to play. Mona, I Need You Baby. This is actually a quote. Bo Diddley said that the only guy that could get his sound, because Bo Diddley's sound was hard to do. He had a tremolo on his amp, didn't he?
Yeah.
And he played a really unique style of sound. I think he used a coin for a pick, just unorthodox. Brian Jones had it down pat. So here's these young kids doing their idols' music pretty well, Now I've Got a Witness is basically just a sped up British blues sort of music. Little by Little was the Shame, Shame, Shame cover by Jimmy Reed. Here's an interesting song, I'm a King Bee. They did that really well. That's Southern blues.
Love that. That's
Slim Harpo.
That's probably one of my favourite songs on the album.
Yep. Carol, we can't have a Stones album without a Chuck Berry cover. Tell Me You're Coming Back to Me. A lot of people don't know this, and here they're in for a treat. That song and Walking the Dog. Who's on backup vocals? Do you know that?
Don't know.
Brian Jones. He's singing.
Should I be surprised by that?
No, other people. I think you already knew.
Oh well. No, I didn't know that he was on backup, but I would assume that he would have been backup on a lot of songs.
No, only that album. Then
Oh, really?
then Mick and Keith started their songwriting thing, and
Cut him out.
Brian was pushed aside. Yeah. So tell me, you're coming back to me was the first proper Stone song they wrote. Wasn't a hit. Keith on 12-string guitar, and "Can I Get a Witness" was their first Motown song. That's a church gospel inspired kind of a song. "You Can Make It If You Try" is another R&B soul song, which Solomon Burke did. And "Walking the Dog" was a famous Southern song, Rufus Thomas.
What about "Not Fade Away"?
That's on the American version. So
Yeah,
when the British albums came out, the American versions came out with slightly different track list.
I've always loved. Yeah, I'm going to say that King B is my favorite on that album.
Well, once again, Brian Jones' slide is just masterful. It's lean, it's mean. Keith did a great job on that acoustic. The other thing that the undiscovered hero on that particular song is Billy Wyman's little bass groove. So these young guys really, really did their homework. They did. I mean, they made that music sound authentic, and it's not easy to do.
Well, all credit to the production team as well at that time, because they were recording something clearly that was new. What's interesting?
That was recorded in Eastern. Is it Eastern Studios or something? And no joke, it was a small room, no money, egg cartons on the wall. I mean, Motown Studios was just the same. Less is more. Sometimes it's just the size of the room and just the quality of the talent and the quality of the amps. You don't need a $500,000 studio. It actually gets in the way of the music.
I think the $500,000 studios come with the egos.
Absolutely. That if the Stones gave us a stripped down album based on a stripped down studio and a stripped down budget, they had no money. I think that first album, we talked about the Vox amps. I think Brian was playing. They were playing harmony guitars too. I don't think Keith got his first proper guitar till the second album.
Yeah, I'm not going to look now, but I will. Yeah, I will check that out because I think you are correct. One thing that really amazes me about the first couple of years of the Stones too, it's the music magazines would have polls.
Yep.
And the best bass player was always Bill Wyman.
Yeah.
And he was winning that poll while Mick Jagger was coming 5th, 6th, or 7th in the vocals.
Yes.
And Keith and Brian were 5th, 6th, and 7th in the guitar player category. So
was that poll counted by fan requests votes? Was it?
Yeah, apparently, yeah. It's in that Stone Alone book that you loaned me that I read over Christmas a couple of years ago, and that blew me away because that's a fact that you don't.
Well, it shows you how shallow the music industry is because they never gave any emphasis on Charlie or Bill, even though they were the engine room of the band. You know.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Brian was obviously the initial showman, and he, commanded authority with the interviews, and he had all the talent and the blonde hair. And then Mick obviously became a lot stronger, played the harp, started writing songs, and he kind of, became the lead man, which is unfortunately understandable in the end because he was the singer, did the move.
Simon saying the New Musical Express poll. Yeah, that poll and others as well. As I remember it, it wasn't just one poll that he was, the number one bass player, while everyone else was 5, 6, 7. It was a couple of other polls too.
I think even through the 70s he won awards, Bill Wyman. Wow. So underrated, just exceptional. Getting back to the Stones and their gear. remember all those pictures we saw of Brian Jones, that big white Gretsch?
Yes.
I guess it got a bit heavy for him after a while because he's about 5'5", wasn't he?
5'5" with short legs.
And a huge Gretsch.
But the girls love that Gretsch.
I'm kicking myself. I saw, no joke, in a pawn shop in Austin. I wished I'd bought it because I don't think they knew what they had. A Vox guitar tear shape. Wow. Are they pretty rare?
Absolutely.
Damn it. Damn it. That would have been a good buy.
Absolutely.
Damn it. I knew I should have pounced on it.
I don't know how they sound. I've never seen one anyway, to play it. So, but I suspect they would sound Stratocaster type.
Oh, very Fendery, yeah, single.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Brian and those guys having great ears, they probably thought themselves, we can't have. That's probably why the Gretsch got lost, because George Harrison played the Gretsch and he was good at it. They probably thought themselves, we need, and we spoke about this before, if Keith's doing that driving rhythm and those leads with the humbuckers, we need to counter that sound because we can't have it too thuddy. We need a brighter rhythm sound to break it up. We can't have two guitars thudding away.
Well, getting back to the Beatles, that's you make a very good point, because that's exactly why George played the Gretsch, because Paul McCartney's bass sounded like a rubber band.
Yep.
John Lennon's Rickenbacker had dead strings, and that was dead. So,
yep.
So that was one of the reasons why George played that Gretsch for a long time to cut through that. Yeah, to cut through that mix, because it just would have sounded horrible.
Oh, absolutely. If you have, let's face it, if you have the same, if you have four humbuckers going all at the same time, I mean, Guns N' Roses, for a lack of a better word, even though they're a great band, Izzy played Gretches and Tellys for a while, didn't he? To counter Slash's Les Paul.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know how true this is, but I remember reading that one of the reasons why George wanted to play the Gretsch was because that they didn't want to play the Stratocaster, because the Stratocaster was played by Hank Marvin and the Shadows, and they didn't want to be identified as in that type of music. So it's interesting that they were using a country guitar.
Yes.
An American, basically a country guitar in a pop music way, but didn't want to be seen playing Stratocaster to be too poppy like the Shadows. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly remember reading that, and that makes a little bit of sense, I suppose.
And the other thing too was the Beatles, the Stones definitely had an edge. They had that rebellious punky streak. The Beatles had it to a lesser extent, but I think Hank Marvin came across quite, not necessarily nerdy, but very well read and very proper.
Straight.
So they probably didn't want to be associated with that either. And that's probably a lot of the doings with the managers and that too.
I think one of the key things about the Stones is that the Stones were individual musicians, and you had Mick, yep, you had Brian. They were individual musicians playing together as a band.
Yep.
And you could hear the individuality.
Yep.
The Beatles played together as a band.
Yes.
The Beatles were a band, in my opinion. You weren't hearing, an individual sound coming. People may disagree with me, and that's fine.
Yeah,
But I think that's the edge. Certainly the edge. If you talk about the Stones having an edge, I think it's got to come through the music first, and certainly the music gave them the edge, and then they took that obviously with their image, because they couldn't be another Beatles, could they? They couldn't be the girl next door, the guy next door band.
No, not at all. And I think there was that famous story where I think not Andrew Luke Oldham, but Eric Easton or one of the managers said, "Oh, we're gonna you guys are going live on TV. We've got $500 in our budget. We've got you 5 suits." And they played on the live TV with I think they did the song "Come On" or "I Want to Be Loved" with their suits. And Keith said, "Oh, went backstage. We started drinking. Had a Coke and some chocolate cake. We spilled it on our suits, and then we looked at each other and they said, 'This ain't us.'" They tried it the one time.
That's
And
right.
the Beatles had their suits and matching clothes for probably at least 2-3 years, didn't they? Till Rubber Soul, or probably before Hard Day's Night.
No, they were still wearing suits then. But
Yeah.
what you have to remember though is that it was a different band for a different audience, basically. And the Stones, all credit to them, had a younger manager who learnt the game through hanging out with Brian Epstein, didn't he?
And
You
he
know,
was a genius. He was a PR guy, had affiliation with the newspaper, was stumbled upon things, and mistakes actually turned out to be a better part for the image, because they would have those stupid headlines: "Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone?" And
well, he dreamt that up, didn't he?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so in all essence, initially they were trying to make 2 Beatles or 2 Stones, or compare it, or make the Stones like the Beatles, but they actually figured out, why don't we make them opposites and we'll make more money and get more. It was all part of that rebellious image, you know.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's like the manager. I didn't realize this until only recently, like maybe 10 years ago. Clapton is God. Well, a fan didn't spray paint that. The management went out and spray painted that.
Oh, is that a fact?
Yes.
Well, the other thing, I remember Keith saying something about it was a funny joke. He said something about, the Beatles were very safe and parents loved to play them in the living room, and they said that they gave the Stones the black hat. They wore the black hat. Meaning the Outlaws.
Clapton doesn't say nice things about the Beatles. He not he, he's not been critical of them as individuals or what they've achieved as a band, but he was in his biography and in that new documentary that came out, they were suspicious. He was suspicious of them because they were 4 individuals and they walked the same, and he remembered seeing them in some clubs in London, and they would do everything together, the same. And and he's a blues purist, being suspicious of all that. And I suppose to an extent, maybe the Stones. Are you there, mate?
Yeah. Oh shit. Oh, just hold the line.
Yeah, don't swear.
Oh, shivers.
Oh, shivers.
Push the wrong button. Exactly. I think Eric, getting back to Eric, he was such a purist that initial years of him with the Blues Breakers, everything had to be real. So the Beatles obviously would have been too textbook, too copybook, too safe.
There's two key moments in the 60s for me that define just about everything. The year that Eric Clapton locked himself away listening to John Mayall's record collection and playing along with his record collection.
Yep.
And then unleashing the guitar on that album that he did with him.
Yes.
And also the prep that the Rolling Stones did and the recording of Beggar's Banquet. Those 2 points in history in the 60s for me are key flagstones for what happened.
And it goes back to those old blues records, because I remember reading up about Eric, and he, as you know, he played in the Roosters and pickup bands, and did some fill-in work, and then he went to then he was in the Yardbirds, and they played that kind of very much that revved up. I think they call it the rave up music. And Graham Gouldman or someone, one of the managers said, "Oh, here's a song. It's going to have harpsichord and it's going to have a 12-string guitar and congas. It's called For Your Love." And Eric was like, "What the hell?" And they said, "We need the song. It's going to be a hit." Eric, true to his roots, and to this day, we got to love him. He said, "Here's my notice. I'll give you guys 2 weeks. I'm out of here." And went up in John Mayall's attic. Was that right? Stayed there for 3 months. And
for a year. For a year.
Was it a year? Was it? Went up in his attic and studied those 78s and those, because look at the Cream music repertoire. Sleepy John Estes, I'm So Glad.
Well, if he didn't have that album or him studying that music, and basically that's what he was doing, we wouldn't have had Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac
or Mick Taylor and Get Your Ayers Out.
Yeah.
And so getting back to Beggar's Banquet, same thing. The Stones, it took Stones a little bit longer to realise they started out, a little bit bluesy. They went into the R&B thing, and they went to Aftermath. It was their first album where they wrote every song, and half of it's pretty good. The other half I could forget about. And then Mick Jagger had a bit of a, not a love affair, but he was very competitive and wanted to be like the Beatles. So Sgt. Pepper came out, and Mick was like, Keith, we've got to do the psychedelic stuff, man. And Brian, being so whacked out and so talented, was like, well, I'll temporarily be on board because I can play a lot of that stuff, the sitar and the tambura and the recorder and the dulcimer and all these exotic Eastern instruments. And once again, the Stones are so good. About 3 or 4 songs are really good. But Keith was like, at the end, he was like, what are we doing? What this is a bad hangover. This is an acid trip. I don't like this. So they came back from, 67 was full of court dates and crap. And they just got back right down to brass tacks, got right back down to business and went back basically to school. And Keith had bought all these blues records back from America, and they just stripped everything back down. Threw away the exotic instruments, threw away the flowery shirts and the funny hats, and who was that guru from India? The
Maharishi.
They forgot his phone number, disconnected him, hung up on him, back to the blues. And let's face it, that was probably the first proper, mature, hard rock album, I would say, or rock blues album. I'm not sure what the category is. But, yeah.
Well, I've said this to you before, and I'm going to say it live on our show. Just imagine being a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old in 1968, being a Stones fan, say, for 3 years, sitting down, listening to that record.
Well, and once again, it's got a little bit of everything in there too, hasn't it?
And that was pop music. That's what young people were listening to.
Amazing. And I tell you what, everybody needed it, because let's face it, 1967 was an experimental year. It was a bad hangover. In 68, everything got back on track. Hendrix was there. The Stones are there. The Cream did a mature album live at Fillmore. Who else? The Doors were doing really well. The early inception of Led Zeppelin came into play. The first album was the Yardbirds had split up by then, and it was basically on. And then you had, the world needed that. These guys had grown from teenagers to actually adult men, and it coincided with, we want to get political, the Vietnam War and race relations in America is the sign of the times. It was monumental, pivotal at that point. The world needed that album. The album was so good, guess what? Not only did it follow up with Let It Bleed, but they had enough material to do a proper tour.
Oh, and yeah, and that tour, gosh, oh. Yeah, it sends shivers up my spine when I see Give Me Shelter and I'm speechless. Yeah. Yeah, I've been listening to like you know, that Get Ya Ya Ya's album out for over half my life.
Mm.
You since you were 8.
Yeah,
um, it's phenomenal.
and just like the first album, it's very much some of the first album. It's got blues. It's got a couple of Chuck Berry covers. It's got just goes to show they never strayed too far away. They always remembered who their heroes were, and they always played homage every album to the people that that they looked up to and helped them.
And at that version of Under My Thumb that they do, gosh, it's so good.
Oh, unreal, unbelievable, unbelievable. Yeah, yeah. That particular chord progression,
Oh,
which is relatively easy to play. The guy, I remember watching Saturday Night Live or one of those American shows, and the band leader was like, "Can you please show me that? I really want to learn how to play that." Just such a neat chord progression. But yeah, yeah, no, it had to happen. It had to happen. Sometimes I think Beggar's Banquet basically, because we talked about it before again, and I really wanted to like the White Album. I think the Stones really, not only did they mature, but they really, I wouldn't say, I would never compare to the Beatles ever again after that.
you see, uh, uh, yeah, and I think this is probably what we have to do too as music fans and guitar players ourselves. You know, we can't fall into that comparison of the Beatles and the Stones, because when you do,
Yep.
you're fighting a losing battle. And I'll tell you why. For me, I've given up doing that. I hadn't listened to Abbey Road for about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and on Sunday I pulled out my casino,
Yep.
and I played Come Together,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and played along with it. Hadn't done that for like months,
Yes.
and did a pretty good first cut. um, but I just remember sitting back after playing along with it
Yep.
for about 5 minutes, thinking, "Wow, you know, that's the great thing about a good song. The chords were pretty easy. There's that Chuck Berry progression that he's doing.
Yes. It's at the heart of that song is just good old fashioned rock and roll.
Yeah. So you sit back as a fan and you enjoy it for what it is,
Yep.
and and you sort of scratch your head though, because I love comparing. I can't escape. I can't
Yeah.
escape from it, and so I sit
Yeah.
back and compare that to Beggar's Banquet. What's interesting though is that this book here. This, if you ever get a chance, people to Can't Buy Me Love, written by an American guy called Jonathan Gould. It's outstanding. This
Okay.
guy's a musician. I like books written by musicians because they give you some insight that a journalist can't give you about the music. You know,
Right. There's less copying and pasting.
yeah. They're giving you an interpretation, but he made an interesting point in there that wherever you went when that album came back, I forget the person that he was talking about, but someone went from one part of America across America when that album came out,
Yeah.
and everywhere that this person stopped and went to get food, or to a petrol station to get some gas, everywhere people were playing the White Album.
Really?
Yeah, so, and for me, being a Beatles nut too, sitting back, here in our part of the world, sort of think, wow, really? Yeah. So
Yeah. Well, and let's face it. While my guitar gently weeps, back in the USSR, um, it had that fun. It's my birthday song was on there. Is that right?
I skip a lot of songs, Carl.
There's what's the other big song on there? Helter Skelter was a huge song. So they had some big songs on there.
I agree with what George Martin said. George Martin said that their egos got in the way. He said that they should have got their heads together and produced a single album.
I think so. Yeah, Bungalow.
Piggies.
What's that?
Piggy. That song, Piggies. That song.
I don't know anything about it. I sold my album.
I'll play a snip of it for you. It's
cartoons.
Gosh. Piggy. Yeah, hold on. Back in the USA, Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, Obla Di Obla Da, which John Lennon absolutely hated. Wild Honeybee, The Continuing Story of Bungalow Bill, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Happiness is a Warm Gun, which is cool. Martha, My Dear, I'm So Tired, Blackbird, Piggies, Rocky Raccoon. So the song? You know what? Your Blues, which is a dig at Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah. Elmore James ain't got nothing this cat. Well, the Beatles, in layman's terms, for people that want to know about music, are four individually talented guys that all can play multiple instruments and all can sing. Stones didn't have that luxury. Stones more of a family.
Well, you and I said this on our first opening show. You've got Beatles for Sale, which has got some covers, which is pretty good. You've got Hard Day's Night. You've got Help. Pretty good albums. Then you've got Rubber, Soul, and Revolver, and every single song on those two albums is outstanding.
Yeah,
and then it goes into the great album that everyone talks about. And again, there are some songs on there that you can probably do without.
Absolutely.
But if we're doing a comparison, Beggar's Banquet, every single song's perfect.
Let
It Bleed, perfect. Then it goes on to Sticky Fingers.
Perfect.
Exile on Main Street.
Flawless.
Just about the best rock and roll album.
Yes.
Ever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a run. What an amazing run. And by that time, obviously, the Beatles are all in their own. Actually, maybe they should have retired earlier. It's just a shame that they couldn't. Yeah, well, that's another conversation within itself. What made the Beatles implode? But back to the Stones, I think. I
just want to do a shout out in the chat though, Carl. Simon Williams, he's watching us from England. He's a friend of ours as well. Yes, Piggies. Charles Manson's favourite. He's right.
Is that right?
Yeah. That was the song that inspired him to go out and have their what is it? Their night stalking and all that. And the race war.
Yeah. Well, because I know that Charles Manson was involved. Was influenced by Helter Skelter. Is that right? Or
well, that whole White Album influenced him.
Yeah. Hitler was a budding artist, failed artist, and Charlie Manson was a budding artist, failed musician. Is that right?
Yeah, well, Neil Young's got an interesting thing in his biography. Neil Young talks about how he goes to this party in Southern California, and there's girls around, and there's drinking, and there's drugs, and all that, and he's talking to this guy, and they're talking about music and guitars and songwriting. Anyway, the guy that he's talking to for half an hour, and later on finds out that it's Charles Manson.
Oh, great. A murderer.
Anyway, so I interrupted you. You were going to say something. You were going to probably end the chat on a discussion on who we should be talking about, and that's the Stones.
Yeah, yeah. No. Well, summarising, I've got to get going because I've got my dinner's getting overcooked. But I'm glad that they mentioned the album Blue and Lonesome because once again, Stones playing homage to the people that really helped them. And full circle once again, a lot of bands have done that. They've actually, they've had a great illustrious career, and they've come back and said, what's this really all about? I wouldn't have the success without the people that influenced me or influenced our band. So how it's only right to basically pay them back by saying thank you. I mean, Eric Clapton's done it. Fleetwood Mac's done it. I mean, Peter Green, obviously. Yeah. I mean, we talked about the Beatles. They loved Buddy Holly. They loved the Everly Brothers. I was going to mention this before with George Harrison and that Gretsch. I mean, they were big Eddie Cochran fans. When we think of the Gretsch, let's face it, Eddie Cochran made that Gretsch what it is today. So yeah.
I'm going to put it down to the generosity I think that musicians tend to have, and I think that's the great thing about music, Carl. I think that's certainly from my own personal perspective that saved me so many times in my life, and it becomes a cliche, I suppose. But when you're talking to another musician or a music fan, they get it when you say the healing power of music. And I agree with you. Eric Clapton, did that Cream reunion tour not because he needed the money. He formed that tour so that he could help out Ginger and Jack, to get some cash.
Wow. Yep. And he would have enjoyed it. Let's face it. I mean, we've heard Eric say something about, the Cream he could forget about and all that. We know damn well that he loved making Sunshine of Your Love. He loved that Guitar Hero. He loved that sound. I mean,
that's one of the reasons why they did that 2005 reunion tour, was because he realized some of the silly things that he said and trying to destroy that part of his legacy. Well, it makes me look like a bit of a dickhead, doesn't it?
And we talk about we talk about the three generations of the Stones. I think that those concerts, when you read up about the interviews with the fans and the reviews, once again, three generations. You got a little girl on the getting piggybacked by her dad. The dad was there in '67, and the little girl's 18 now, and there's little 9-year-old there. They just love it. So
awesome. Hey, mate, I really appreciate you giving your time. I know you're busy.
Hey, no, it's fine. It's fine. Wednesday's good. I'm glad that we could, not every night's going to be perfect. We're going to, run short, so we could always, midweek. The midweek's fine. The summer.
Yeah, I as I say, I know you're busy and you've got things on, so I'll take any chance you've got to jump on. But otherwise, I'll see you here for the Sunday show.
The Sunday night sesh, Sunday afternoon sesh, 4:00 live. Be there. Limited ticket.
Front row seats. There's plenty of them, so jump on board, folks. Hey, man. Good to see you.
Cool. You'll click off now, and I'll just talk to you briefly.
No problem.
Awesome.
I'll click off.